Welcome to the Good Growing Podcast. I am Chris Enroth, horticulture educator with the University of Illinois Extension, coming at you from Jacksonville, Illinois. We have a bit of a different setup for folks today. We are all seeing each other, and Katie, Ken, I didn't know we all look like this. So I've only seen from like shoulders up.
I didn't know you had legs.
Yeah, how did you got here? That's amazing. So we do all own cars, and we were able to drive here and see each other face to face. So first time doing this since we've done the podcast. And so this is a new experience for us. So if you're listening, this is probably no different, except for maybe a little bit more echoey because we're in a large room here where we're at. But if you're watching us on YouTube, yeah, there are faces and we are sitting next to each other instead of in our Brady Box setups or Brady Bunch. That's the name of the show, right? Brady Bunch box. I know what I'm saying. But you know, that's our setup for today. We must introduce our co-host with us every single week. So Katie Parker, local foods educator from Adams County, also in Jacksonville though. So
Yeah.
Might just have to join your unit, kid.
We're all here. Yeah. Ample room in all of the office space. So I think Ken definitely has room for Katie and I, yes.
Our rates are reasonable.
Yeah, they're good, reasonable rates. Donuts, lunches.
Donuts, cake, yeah,
cake,
anything
okay.
you can find.
All right, sounds good. And of course, Ken Johnson, horticulture educator based here in Jacksonville.
Yeah, we've got some room in the basement.
Oh, you have
the offices down there.
See, none of my offices have a basement. This is looking better every day. Yes, you can put me in the basement.
Start cleaning them up for you.
Thank you. Me and the cobwebs, which are fine. So, and of course, our special guest today, we're going to be talking about ponds. We're talking about algal blooms, but we're joined by energy and environment educator Duane Friend. Duane, thank you for walking down the hall and joining us today.
Yeah, I was going to say I've been in here for a year and a half. I've been waiting for you guys, and finally you get here. So that's great.
Yes, that email did go out in 2019, so it's been a while. But so today we're going to be talking about ponds and talking about algae, but a couple other things because it's a common question. It comes in a lot during extension office, mostly during the growing season, about how to take care of ponds. We're talking algae, weeds, but other management things like that. So, but Duane, my wife and I, we debate about all sorts of things. Of course, we would debate, we're driving by and we see, oh, that's a pond. And she's like, no, it's a lake. No, that's a lake. And this is a pond. And like Lake Michigan, that's a lake. So tell me, Duane, how would you describe a pond? What is the scope of what we're talking about today?
That is a good question, and I'm going to refer back to the Illinois Department of Natural Resources, their definition of that defining line between a pond and a lake, and it's basically about 20 acres.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. So
I've been right this whole time. Okay.
And that's their definition. I don't know if there's other definitions out there, but yeah, so we'll just go with that.
20 acres. Okay. So when we're talking about 20 acre size ponds. And I think we're going to be talking whether you have a farm pond, so maybe you have pasture or agriculture around it, or whether you live in a neighborhood setting. So you might have lawns or something around that. If that's fair, yeah, that's kind of the scope we're looking at today. Okay. So, yeah.
So Duane, a lot of questions that we're getting this time of year are about algal blooms. And so can you tell us more about algal blooms, how to identify one, and then how to identify if it's dangerous?
I've been getting about probably 8 to 15 calls for the last few months on ponds from various places around the state. And I would say probably at least 50% of them or more on algal blooms.
Okay.
And that's something that usually we start getting questions about that in March, and it'll go through till about the end of August. And yeah, one of the big questions is they're always concerned, and we have people actually bringing in samples from time to time asking if that algae is toxic. And sometimes it's really not that easy to determine. It's not something that you could just look at it and definitively say, no, there's no problem with that. But typically, if it's going to be one of those, it's called cyanobacteria type of blooms, if you look at the pond and it looks like it's got this bright green paint on it, very shiny, almost metallic color, that's a very good indicator that it could very well be one of those types of blooms. And honestly, don't see that very often on ponds. For the most part, most of it's that filamentous algae, and those typical types of algae that you see in most farm ponds. So getting that, I guess the first thing that I want to mention for sure is that not very many at all of those algal blooms are actually toxic. But if you do end up having that type of bloom, it's not something that if you stick your finger in it, you're going to die. But you don't want to stick your finger in it. You don't want to expose your skin to it because it can be an irritant. You don't want to let your pets get into it. You don't want your livestock to get into it. So then the question becomes, what do you do with it? And you can kill it out, although this time of year we're really backing away from telling people to kill out most of their pond weeds, because as the summer goes along, water temperatures increase, and as water temperature increases, the oxygen supply in that water goes down, so then the fish don't have as much oxygen to begin with, and then you kill out a whole lot of plant growth all at once, and that takes the oxygen levels almost down to zero. And then you have situations where people are frantically calling in and saying, I've got all of these fish laying up on the water, and what do I do? And a lot of times they immediately want to go to assuming that it was some kind of a chemical problem. And that what happens in some situations is that maybe they have applied a herbicide to a pond and killed out the vast majority of the weeds, and they had an oxygen depletion problem, and that's what killed the fish. It wasn't the herbicides, but it was that oxygen depletion. So at this time of year, we really kind of back away from having people put much onto their ponds. Maybe if they want to do some sections at a time. Some herbicides, which we may get into talking about a little bit later, are systemic herbicides where you have to treat the whole pond up to a certain concentration. Those you may not want to do anymore at this time of year, but if you can do spot spraying and those type of things, you can do that. So for the regular algae as well, I am beginning to see a lot of that starting to die out as well. So really not recommending a whole lot of work being done on that right now as well, simply because it's already beginning to die out naturally. So I guess the two big takeaways is don't immediately assume that the algae that's in the pond is toxic, because in the vast majority of cases it's not. And if you do suspect that it is, you can try to bring it into an extension office and see if we have someone available that could maybe help determine what it is, or at the very least take a digital picture of it, send it in, and then we can kind of go from there with it.
Is there just like a simple or water test that you can do, or is it mostly based off site?
Most of the time for water tests, since you can't take it into the local health department or anything like that, you're going to have to send it into a private lab for microbiological analysis, and that can get pretty costly.
So if you do have an algal bloom, is it still okay to fish and eat that fish if it's not toxic?
Yeah. Just be sure to have plenty of fishing line, because you're probably going to lose some of those fishing lines and lures if you try to drag it through there. Now, I have had some instances where people have actually physically raked some of that filamentous algae out. I don't know if anybody's ever tried that, but that is really difficult to do.
Really?
It's so wet, and then you pile a bunch of it up on the bank, and I haven't been around it, but I would guess that it's probably going to start smelling pretty nasty after a few days. So, but I give kudos to those that have raked that out, because it's very physically demanding work. And that's one option that people could do at this time of year if they wanted to maybe do a small section to get to for fishing. But as far as fishing and those types of things, yeah, they can go ahead and do that. Just, you're going to have to contend with what's there.
Now, if they've treated their pond with something like copper sulfate, is it still okay to eat that fish?
What we always recommend people do is to read those labels on whatever herbicide they're using, and it will give very specific directions on what restrictions there are. Copper sulfate is one of those that actually has some of the least restrictions in terms of drinking and fishing and those kind of things. Some of the others may have a week some may have several weeks. So we always tell people to very closely read those directions, and it will give you exactly the amount of time you have to wait before using it for swimming, fishing, drinking, whatever.
I have pulled in some monsters on some, we'll just say, vegetative ponds, and you reeling them in and you pull all the moss and stuff off there and you get this little sunfish on the end of it. It's kind of disappointing. You think you got something big, but it's
Mostly algae.
mostly just algae. Yeah.
All right, so sometimes you see like aerators and stuff on ponds.
Mhm.
What exactly are people using those for?
A lot of times it's more for looks than anything. But and they are very aesthetically pleasing. You got those fountains shooting up water, and that looks really nice. Now they are adding some oxygen into the water, so that is the benefit from doing that. And sometimes folks will say, well, it's killing out the plants. It's not killing out the plants. All it's doing is pushing it off to the edges, so you don't have it right there where the water is falling down on the water, and those waves are pushing it away. So that's the main benefit, is it's adding that dissolved oxygen in there. So hopefully you don't have a fish kill when that plant material starts to die out. But I'm sorry, folks, it does not kill any plants. It doesn't take away any plants or anything like that. And the other thing I will mention real quick is when you do have living vegetation in there, as long as that living vegetation is there, as long as it's photosynthesizing during the day, it is pumping water into that water, pumping air into that water.
Mhm.
So, and what you'll see on a daily basis is you'll see the highest oxygen concentrations usually about mid-afternoon, lowest levels will be about right before sunrise. So if you go out on your pond and you go out right at sunrise, you see some big fish out there and they're gasping for air, that's a giveaway you've got very low oxygen in your pond.
Interesting.
So then when it comes to those aerators, should those be run during the winter? Or you typically turn those off?
If there is, if we have a really cold, long-lasting winter and we have ice on the pond, there can be a winter fish kill, because as that ice covers over the pond, obviously there's not going to be a lot of oxygen interaction between the atmosphere and the water. So that cuts down on the oxygen. If you add snow cover on top of that ice, even during the wintertime, there is some photosynthesis going on. So there's still some oxygen being pumped into that water. But if you put snow on top of the ice, that cuts down on any sunlight getting through there. And you could very easily have a fish kill during that scenario. And people won't know that there's a fish kill until they go out the next spring and try to throw a line in and they catch nothing.
Mhm.
So adding an aerator, it's kind of up to the individual if they want to do that. Most years, especially the winters we've had for the last 10 or 15 years, we really haven't to contend too much with ice being on those ponds for long periods of time. So is it really absolutely unnecessary? I would say no. But if they want to use it, it's not going to hurt anything either.
Your pond is well built. If it's deep enough, you probably wouldn't need something like that, right?
Right, and IDNR usually suggests that it be at least 8 feet deep to guard against any type of problems with the water getting too cold or that kind of thing.
So kind of shifting a little bit away from algae, but talking a little bit more about maybe plants that are emerging from the water, some floating or submerged, but maybe more broadleaf type plants. Controlling things like cattails. That is a very common question that I seem to get. And I guess, oftentimes I first ask, well, do we want to be controlling cattails? Can they ruin a pond? And then if so, like how do we do that with something that's emerged above the water versus something like an algae that's floating in or under the water surface?
Well, and that's a really good point that you make, that do we want to, I know some folks like to have a pristine pond with absolutely nothing on it and looking like Lake Tahoe or something like that.
Yeah.
But it's good to have some plant material in there. Usually it's suggested that you have around a quarter of the pond have some type of plant material on it, and that's kind of a happy medium between that. Now, as far as cattails, if there's some area where you want to clear out a small section of it, you can do that. And actually for cattails, we're actually coming into the prime season when that should be controlled. Actually, the best time to do that is about mid to late September.
Okay.
When the cattails are taking those food reserves down into the root systems, And you could use a aquatic version of Roundup, which is, I believe it's rodeo. And can spray that on the cattails, and that will do a really good job of control for cattails that time of year. If you try to do it in the springtime, it's not going to be as good because everything is going up into the above ground growth. But doing it this time of year, you get really good control with that.
Okay.
Now, for other types of plants, say surface floating plants and those kind of things, again, you're probably looking at those types of chemicals that would have more of a systemic type of control where you have to get a certain concentration of that chemical within the water. And that's one of those things that we're kind of saying it's a little bit late in the year to do that.
So we've had a person contact us about a pond that had cattle in it. And so the cattle eroded part of the dam of the pond. And so this person had fixed that damage and they're wanting to reseed around the pond. Is there anything that you would suggest for reseeding?
First of all, I'm just picturing in my mind somebody with this large fishing line throwing out to the cattle.
I have to have steak tonight.
Sounds like a Far Side cartoon or something. There are several different types of seedings that you could do. Things like, and my mind just went blank, smooth brome and clover and those types of things. And the other thing, especially at this time of year, you can still do some seeding at this time of year and it'd be okay, but it may not hurt, especially on something like that, to put in a temporary seeding of maybe oats or something over that to get that flush of material, especially after the rains that we've had in the last couple of weeks. You need something on there so that it doesn't erode away before this other regular seeding gets established. But there are several different options out there. And again, one of those things that people can do if they have that type of critical area seeding, they could either, again, contact a local extension office, and if someone isn't available right there in that office to get it, they can send it to someone who can give them that information. Also, the local NRCS office has listings of seeding mixes for those dams that can be given to real easily.
Yeah, keep those cattle off. Put a fence up.
All right, so we had another question come in talking about duckweed. And I personally kind of like duckweed. I don't know why I'd want to get rid of it, but they're removing duckweed from their pond by a tractor bucket load. They're surrounded by prairie and timber. They want to know why this duckweed keeps growing and how they can prevent it.
Well, they can control it. They're never going to prevent it. Sorry to say. Duckweed can come in just like the name implies. They can get on burrs and other things, go from one pond to another, and it'll come right back. And one of the things that people may notice too, especially in the springtime, they might have a nice clean pond, and then the next day they look at it and it's almost covered with it. And one of the things that happens with that is some of that duckweed at the end of the season will, when it dies out, it sinks down to the bottom. And then when springtime comes along and the sun gets stronger and some of that sunlight hits the bottom of that pond, it starts photosynthesizing again, it becomes buoyant, pops back up. So that's one of those plants, again, that if you really want to try to control it, there are several different types of chemicals out there. One type is a contact herbicide. So if you spray it, it just kills the stuff that it comes in contact with. Another kind, and I believe the active ingredient is called fluoridone. It's more of one of those systemic herbicides where you put it in the water, you have to have a certain concentration of it to kill it out. And that will do a fairly decent job with it, but you'll also get sticker shock when you look at the price of it. It again depends, like you say, on how much you really want to put into that to get the result that you want. So, again, that's really up to the individual on what they're wanting to do with that pond.
And so again, like controlling duckweed timing wise, right now is probably too late.
Yep, another one of those. And most areas, when they're asking about that, they probably have a pond that's almost completely covered with it. So if they did something to it all at once, with that systemic herbicide, yeah, they could very easily end up with a fish kill.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, definitely be careful with that. I've definitely seen instances where folks have pumped a lot of stuff into a pond and they've had the fish kill. The one actually right near my house. So they did that.
Hope you weren't downwind.
I was not downwind. But it was a interesting situation because where the wind blows, that's where the fish wind up, because that's where they all float above onto shore there. So,
And that's frustrating for the pond owner, and they've invested all that money in fish, and they probably have kids and or grandkids that want to come out there and do that, and so they have to wait a whole season or longer before they can get that fish population back.
Yeah.
So we usually, anything after July 1st, we say really back away from doing much with ponds, except on the above ground growth after July 1st.
Now, I've always mentioned to folks, when we're talking about things like rain gardens, things like that, if they want to try to solve a drainage problem, you have to start higher up in the watershed. And so I'm thinking like improving some of the drainage ways in the ponds, or, other things you can do. Does that ring true in that sense?
Oh, yeah. If you have the ability to do that, that's fantastic. I was just out on a pond a couple of weeks ago, and they had a really nice vegetative area going back up quite a ways from where their pond was at. And their pond was very clean because of that, because it was trapping all that sediment before it got in there. And of course, when you trap the sediment, you're also trapping some of those nutrients that are going in with that sediment. So the more that you can have as a buffer between where the pond is and where especially any fields are at or anything like that, or nutrients are being loaded onto that, the better. Some people actually have retention or sediment ponds where the water will go in and settle, and then you have cleaner water going on into the pond. The only thing is with those sediment ponds, you've got to clean those out about every 2 to 3 years.
You gotta have equipment access and everything. Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, that's a lot of great information. So Ken, Katie, I think we've got one in the bag, a live show. Well, sort of live, still recorded, but we're here together finally. Well, Duane, thank you for being with us on this inaugural journey of sitting amongst each other.
I feel honored. I'm just, I want to wave to the crowd.
We'll get a parade going outside.
I already got the limo set up. So.
Be taking autographs from 9 to 9:03 tonight.
That's right. That's right. $20 per signature. So, well, Duane, Energy and Environment Educator here in Jacksonville, Illinois. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
Quite welcome.
Well, Ken, Katie, thank you as always for being here in person, no doubt. And just want to remind folks that the Good Growing Podcast is produced by Wendy Ferguson, edited by me, Chris Enroth. So, Katie, Ken, we're going to do this again. I don't think we're going to be in person though next time. So,
Right.
All right. Well, thank you for
You're
both being
saying
here.
once is enough, right?
I've had my fill. One more year, we'll do this again. So, but Katie, Ken, thank you for being here today.
Yeah, thank you, Duane. It was
Thank you.
good to see you guys in person.
Good to see you, Duane.
Walk across the
Right
hall.
across the hall.
And Chris and Katie, thank you for coming to beautiful Jacksonville.
Wonderful. Come on, Ken, what's the line?
So let's do this again next week.
Oh, we shall do this again next week. We are going to be back in our Brady box. Wait, I can't say that. Brady Bunch boxes. We're going to be talking containers, gardening containers, whether it's food, ornamentals. That's what we're going to be talking about. So listeners, thanks for doing what you do best, whether that is listening, or if you're watching us on YouTube, watching. And as always, keep on growing.